Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back! And as this intro's a little awkward to do, because technically I've recorded another video that I think I'm gonna upload after this one, where I actually talk about the fact that I've been, absent for like a month now. So I'll hit you up with the too long didn't read. I haven't been very excited with SSNU for a little bit. And since it's kind of the main thing I do, I've wanted to not record as much, because I can record other stuff. I can do BDSP, UU, OU, hell, they got RU now, but I just want to mostly stick to what this channel's generally about. Although I do and anyhow, it's not important. We have the VR shift, and from here on out, hopefully I can make some more content, even if it's like just me going over like 80 VNU replays. Man, that tier's so fun, and I kind of want to one day make a guide to it, where I at least talk about, like, I go over the VR or something, or go over some replays, just something. That'd be really fun. But to actually get into the point of this video, we finally have an update, and now, yeah, this slate is interesting. As the post itself here says, welcome Todkey, first of all, to the VR voting council, but also I feel like we kind of had different rationales we went at this VR with for this update, because obviously Bronzong left the tier at the beginning of the month. That's huge. I actually recorded a video where I try my best to go over Pokemon that would benefit from Bronzong leaving the tier, and some of us probably voted, I think, more in mind with, like, what a final reflection of Bronzong meta would be. Others voted more with, like, first thoughts of the tier post-Zong. So I do think some of these shifts may get overdone next update. But I just wanted to, like, mention that now, so keep in mind, if something does feel a little wonky, maybe it was skewed a little bit. Overall, I still think most of these changes are pretty justified. There will always be a few I disagree with, but that's just kind of how it goes. These metas are subjective, and I'm also going to talk about the first response to this post, because I feel like it deserves attention. Because I genuinely think that post has a weird misunderstanding, maybe, of Tangela. I don't know. I don't want to defend Tangela, man, but it doesn't feel right to not mention it, since the reply is right there. But let's get into it. So, rises Diancie to S. I've seen some people think Diancie's as bad as A-, and to that I say, you're going to the bench. One of my own SSNU slots for the current NU snake draft going on said he thinks Diancie is more of an A- A-rank Pokemon. I told him, alright, off to the bench with you. But I think Diancie is probably top 2 Pokemon that benefit from Bronzong leaving, right? And that's not even necessarily for stealth rocking sets. Those definitely do get better, especially because we, I think, can more justifiably experiment with, like, offensive Stealth Rock now. Since, look at the 2 main Steel types. You can't just randomly resist fire now. But offensive sets in general, I think, should pick up quite a bit. Diancie, we've already seen, I think, last week even, for NU Snake. So the first week without Bronzong, we've already seen offensive sets get used. With, like, Rock Polish, Meteor Beam, I think Calm Mind Diancie also got used. Don't remember it actually doing anything in the game, but it's showing that people are quite willing to try out those sets out. And something you'll notice with a lot of offensive Pokemon in the slate that do rise, that maybe on paper have a bad matchup against Steel types, they've got coverage that is much better now with Bronzong out of the tier. Diancie is the most, it's at the forefront. It's got Mystical Fire this gen, so Escavalier is not a safe Pokemon. Copperajah needs Chip, but you can overwhelm it. Obviously, something like Vileplume, that'll always be kind of annoying, because Power Gem only does so much to it. But Diancie's just in a much better spot now. You're gonna have to rely on some more blanket checks to it, like Vaporeon. Sylveon with some special defense investment, which, if we're talking about Meteor Beam sets, those could certainly pick it off if the user's not careful. And I just think Diancie is given a lot more breathing room. Also, I mean, I was gonna say, like, Xatu's Okay, so people are saying Xatu's declined in usage. I don't really agree with that. But, I mean, hey, if Xatu gets lower in usage, I guess you could set rocks more safely now. Xatu was only really effective at denying Diamond Storm Body Press Heal Bell sets from setting the rocks up. But I guess. Next one up, Vileplume to A+. I think this one's also pretty self-explanatory. One of Vileplume's best answers was Bronzong, because no matter what Plume wanted to do, it could not do anything to it. I saw someone to say, like, oh, no, it's Overcoat Escavalier because you can't Sleep Powder. Vileplume doesn't really run Sleep Powder too much. It is a good move, because, you know, it would still cripple Bronzong, it would cripple other poison types as well. Like, it's just an option. Duraludon it help versus, Dragalge it would help versus, Salazzle is a big one that would help versus. It has its use, but a lot of the Vileplume sets we've seen lately have been growth-based. The Growth, Giga Drain, Sludge Bomb, Strike Sap. We've seen a lot of Infestation as well get used, because Infestation, like, it just beats Protox Escavalier. It beats Protect 3 attacks. Unless Escavalier has Sword Stance, it cannot beat that kind of Vileplume. And in general, Escavalier kind of suffers against, or it struggles to beat Vileplume without Sword Stance anyway. It's just Infestation really trivializes that, because you're not trying to boost to +6 and then try to do Giga Drains for like 20% still. So, Vileplume is very appreciative of the extra breathing room that it is given without Bronzong around to just switch into it and then immediately start threatening quite large amounts of damage. And speaking of Escavalier, though, we also rose it all the way to A+ too. Escavalier, like at the end of December, definitely solidified itself as the second best steel type in the tier. You already had people wanting it up to A+, but now it's even more clearly at that spot, especially with Hail getting a lot of usage now. I think Escavalier having Overcoat, being able to keep switching into Vanillix, make sure that unlike other steel types like Copperajah, Silvally Steel, if you wanted to bring up a really niche one, it's not taking that constant hail damage that Vanillix, I mean, hell, it was known for doing that last generation too. Where a huge thing Vanillix had going for it, along with, you know, hidden power still being in the tier, was that one of the big ways it was able to weaken steel types was through negating lefties, or in the case of Silvally Steel, just adding on more chip damage to it. Escavalier doesn't have to worry about that. And just resisting ice is also nice for going against Beartic, if you want to talk about the shitty Hail Sweeper. It helps there too. But in general, I find that SD Escavalier is really annoying. I find Protox really annoying. I find Protect 3 attacks really annoying. Escavalier is just kind of hard to punish. And a lot of its best defensive answers, outside of Vileplume, just don't want to take the knockoff. You know, Talonflame just never wants to get knocked. You talk about, like, even Arcanine, which I think is a little less bad now. Arcanine even doesn't want to have to deal with that, because then you're going to keep being pressured into using Morning Sun. But without Bronzong, Escavalier 1000% is the best steel in the tier now. Although, Copperajah, I think you could start making a case for Raja to be one of the top 5 mons in the meta again. Assault Vest just doesn't really have great answers. And part of this too, part of what plays into Copperajah's favor is just with Bronzong leaving, Bronzong really was like a duct tape fix to the tier. I think now NU is definitely being exposed for having just an abundance of breakers that don't really have too many shared checks now. It's a lot harder to build cohesive teams that check what you need to in the meta. That flexibility that Bronzong allotted teams is gone. And something like Copperajah now, you know, go back to its bog standard Assault Vest set of Heavy Slam, Power Whip, Superpower, Stone Edge. Checks to this mod are just not as plentiful as they used to be. And then, of course, losing Bronzong as Steel-type competition is absolutely huge as well. I think Raja, mostly from a breaker standpoint, has gotten incredibly better now. And I mean, look no further than, say, Stresh versus on Arceus from last week of NU Snake. Copperajah was a huge problem, because he just has coverage for everything you'd want. Really, the best, if you're talking about like best Copperajah answer, a lot of it comes down to pivoting versus it, forcing helmet damage, or using Arcanine. And I still don't think we're ready to acknowledge Arcanine as, like, good. So, going forward, we'll see what the tier adapts. And yeah, next up, Silvally-Ground up to A. No more Levitate Bronzong to potentially queue into. I do think the calls that Silvally-Ground is, like, broken are a little over-ambitious. Like, you would have to have been, like, incredibly high on Ground Valley before Zong left, in my opinion, to think that it's broken now. The reason I say this is because Bronzong didn't really run Levitate anyway. It was a good ability still, but that wasn't the most common one. Most of it was heat proof. So, a lot of the time, you still beat it anyway. You did lose a potential check, but there's still a lot of Pokemon in the tier, and even hassles. I mean, hell, I'm high on Weezing as a Pokemon even, and Weezing destroys Silvally-Ground. You wisp that boy, and it is gone. Obviously can't run Neutralizing Gas to beat this, but I think Levitate Weezing is better anyway. Especially since, you know, if you're one of the Xatu is on a downward trend believers, well, hey, there you go. You don't even need Newt Gas. But, Xatu's still really good. Talonflame at least can wisp you. If it, comes in on, like, a non-SD. Or if it comes in on a non-rock slide, my bad. You can still at least wisp the, Ground Valley. Vaporeon, I think right now should be running more physical bulk. That actually lets you take on Ground Valley a fair bit better. Quagsire, we're seeing, I mean, through this rise here, it's been getting better. I just feel in general we still have enough room to contain Silvally-Ground to where I would not call it broken. I just think it's, you know, it's a good offensive ground type. Which, in you needs ground types. We have, what, like Golurk, Ground Valley, Rhydon, and Mudsdale? It's a little rough out here. And Quag. All these kind of feel like kind of bad ground types. Anyhow, Vaporeon to A. Again, I think just as Hail increases in prevalence, it is nice to have a Pokemon that can give you really safe insurance against it, and it generally partners well with other Pokemon that check Hail teams, i.e. Escavalier, Copperajah, keeping them healthy, making sure that you just do not lose to those builds. Also, I mean, hey, passing the biggest possible wish in the tier is pretty cool. Next up, now we're getting to, like, more Fringe raises. Frostlass to B. I think a lot of this is people experimenting with Frostlass on non-hyper offense as well. I believe I've seen Confide bring a team in U-Snake with, like, a balanced Frostlass Spikes team. And those have been working pretty decently as well. And it's kind of a similar story with Quagsire, where it's not necessarily the archetype you'd associate it with getting much better, that being Stall, but people are just using Quagsire more as a standalone defensive Pokemon. They're using Frostlass as a standalone Spiker, and we're seeing success with it. And of course, Unaware is really good for shutting down Pokemon like Scrafty, SD Escavalier, we talked about Silvally-Ground. It's a good form of insurance. Next up, Rhydon up to B. Sort of like Silvally-Ground, where you just appreciate Levitate Bronzong no longer being in the tier. Now you don't have to feel like running Smackdown is ever worth it. You can just go 3 attacks, which is usually like Earthquake, Stone Edge, and then Mega Horn or Heat Crash even. And it's a good offensive rocker. Obviously having another rock resist around is also really good just because Tyrantrum, I feel like that Pokemon is always looming in the back of everyone's heads, is like really threatening, really problematic. And so it is cool to see another possible answer to it. Also, having a bird check is always cool. Bronzong was one of the better answers to, say, bulk up Braviary. Because you just, you know, you ran Iron Defense, you boosted alongside it, and then you beat it. And Rhydon can kind of do something similar if you opt for Swords Dance. And since Braviary is pretty much only running sub-bulk up right now, you're not too worried about that. Scrafty up to B. We've seen a fair bit of success of it in U-Snake. It's a bulky dark type. I mean, it's pretty much just the Guzzlord niche, except you have a lot more late game potential. I think probably I'd reference some of Stresh's games from U-Snake as well. I know he's brought it at least once, and it put in a fair amount of work. Knockoff spam into bulk up, sweeping late game is just pretty nice. It gives you a lot of utility at all stages of the game because Scrafty's just so bulky. And unlike another bulky setup sweeper, it's Snorlax. you're not as annoyed by having to use Rest for longevity. I mean, you've got Drain Punch and Leftovers to rely on as well. Snorlax only has lefties. And since you've got Shed Skin, you're not... Like, you still have to play the roulette of, am I actually going to get the Shed Skin proc to go off? But it's not as bad. You're not, like, a sitting duck. And, frankly, Drain Punch is also quite huge because it means you're not going to be forced into using Rest as early. Duraludon to B-, I do think this is genuinely a relic of the last meta. It's not that Duraludon is bad now, it's more that I think Duraludon's main niche was that those Expert Belt sets, being able to lure in into it KO Bronzong with Dark Pulse, that was just huge for it. And the Steel types that are around now don't have that happening to them. I also just think Goodra as a Dragon type wall breaker is a fair bit better, despite the slight speed disadvantage. You do a lot more defensively because your special bulk isn't so troll. So you can actually stave off, for example, Rotom Mow. And I just think Duraludon requires a little bit too much defensive compensation in the team builder for it to be worth it in this specific metagame. Yeah, Machamp to B-, I think people are... This is like a really minor shift, all things considered. I think it just comes down to people saying, you know what? Machamp can't be that much worse than Sirfetch'd. And Machamp requires less support as well, just because you don't worry about status. Sirfetch'd still has notable niches. It's a lot faster. It's got priority. And, I mean, I think it's just easier for it to cheese through its checks because of crits. But Machamp is at least a valid enough pick to where we feel fine giving it a little slight nudge upward. And we see Weezing up to B-. Again, I feel it is similar to Vileplume in that it does benefit a fair amount from the loss of Bronzong, as a Pokemon that could just kind of come in and exploit you whenever it wanted. I also think Taunt Weezing is just really nice to disrupt a lot of the slower setup mons that we have right now, i.e. Snorlax, Escavalier, and Scrafty. Into D female up to C+, I could honestly see it going up more later. It doesn't have to worry about Shadow Ball anymore for getting past Bronzong. So that gives you the ability to play around with that last team slot, or not team slot, move slot more. You've got like Hyper Voice if you wanted to hit, say, a Drapion a little harder. You got Healing Wish, you got Trick. And this kind of goes back to Diancie, where now you can just rely on Mystical Fire to hit Steel types, which is really nice. And a Tangela up to C+, I don't... This is such a change I don't care about. I think I voted it up. But it's like, it's a good ground type check. It's got Regenerator. Knockoff plus Sleep Powder make it a lot more annoying to deal with than posts like this would imply it to be. And I think with Ground Valley being so common right now, it is cool to have a Pokemon that can kind of keep up with it. Obviously, Swords Dance into U-turn is still going to be annoying for you to deal with. Like, that will chip away at you, especially if hazards of any kind are up. But you still dissuade it, or you still prevent it from just sweeping. And if it's Flame Charge, well, it can't really break you ever, which is pretty valuable. And we got the Hail guys ranked next. Alola Slash and Vilux are viewed as the quote-unquote good ones, whereas Aurorus and Beartic are the quote-unquote bad ones. Mostly, we say that because these two can function as like their own semi-Hail core a lot more effectively than like these two can do things with in that vein. But full Hail has at least gotten enough success to where ranking all four is more justified. And it somehow Uxie winds up back on the VR. For what reason? I don't know. But it is. Anyhow. Drop. Salazzle back down to A. I didn't really know why it rose last shift. That's really it. I think it's more just people kind of correcting and being like, oh, okay. And of course, like, Vaporeon being really common again, I think hurts it. Dragalge and Goodra both being incredible right now hurts it too. Even though it has Dragon Pulse, I feel that last move slot is kind of hard to figure out sometimes, whether you want, like, Overheat for just that nuke button, whether you want Encore to mess up Vaporeon, or, of course, Dragon Pulse for, well, Dragalge and Goodra. Drapion on A-. I think people are just realizing this mon kind of sucks. I voted it down to B+. I think it's so hard to justify using this over Guzzlord. I know they don't really play the same role, but I just find that Dark type slot is kind of a niche of its own in some ways because of how much it does for you defensively. I think Guzzlord and even Scrafty are a fair bit better in that regard. And Drapion just kind of struggles to make the progress you'd want it to, with Silvally-Ground and Mudsdale both being really common. Sirfetch'd down to A-. I think it's been on a downward trend for a while. It's really hard to support because it does nothing defensively. It is one of those mid-speed tier breakers as well. And frankly, Leak is both bullshit and awful at the same time. I've seen Sirfetch'd just not get crits, but I've also seen Sirfetch'd crit every turn. So it's just kind of inconsistent as a breaker. Again, I would honestly at times, I kind of prefer Machamp to it at this point. Because Sirfetch'd as well, you actually care about being burned. So it's not like it's a hard task to pair it with a Cleric, but you basically have to. Whereas with Machamp, it's like you don't care about the Talonflame or Vileplume pivoting it on you and fishing for status. You just facade it for like 70, and you say, okay, have fun playing the game now. To Blade down to B, the Smon has not seen success, and the few times that it's been brought in tournament play, it's really just been used for death fodder. I think on Arceus has used it multiple times in a new Snake, and it's looked pretty bad every time. Most people at this point seem to just think, like, not even bothering with Swords Dance 3 attacks, going like Toxic 3 attacks may just be the best way to get mileage out of it. As a Steel type, it's kind of terrible, as it doesn't check many of the Pokemon outside of, like, I guess physical rock and flying types that you'd want to Steel to, but all the special breakers, they just mess it up. I think I think Deblade probably fits on different teams than, say, Copperajah and Escavalier. I think really the only time I've seen it have any sort of success on more offensive builds, where maybe you want that priority, and maybe you just want to make sure that you have insurance against, hey, I mean, fast rocks and flyings we have, and I think it does a good job of at least keeping those contained. Ninjask, down to C+, continues being bad. I mean, Diancie being incredible in this meta is annoying, because you can't even try to be, like, one of those weird dudes that runs Magneton. Like, you can't even trap a Diancie, man, so you're just trying to find a way to overwhelm it, find a way to overwhelm Copperajah, find a way to overwhelm the 50 other Pokemon that just don't let you ever set up late game and sweep. Yeah, good Mon. I'm so glad this Mon is bad right now. Palisade down to C+. It just doesn't really see usage, and I do think you losing out on Bronzong is kind of bad for it, because they had pretty decent defensive synergy. You do like Palisade plus Bronzong plus a Dark type. My bad. But you'd pair those three together, and you got a nice little defensive core. So, Palisade suffers from losing one of its better defensive partners. And Eternator dropped to C because, again, it's like, it doesn't see usage, but there's still a niche there in that it's a fire type that can beat Diancie. So, we felt that's still worth keeping it ranked for now, but maybe it'll go away. And it is to cover this right here. I see just one Tangela for good reason. It's a niche Pokemon. Talk about languages, no mention what they could. Oh, didn't mean to do that. I don't feel any need to respond like that. This defining niche, it's a more sturdy grass type. Like, Regenerator is legitimately huge, and nothing really is great at consistently switching into you outside of Vileplume, because of knockoff plus Sleep Powder both being really good at crippling your checks. You know, Escavalier doesn't want to lose its lefties, Raja doesn't want to lose its AV, because, you know, then it gets popped a lot harder by certain special attackers. Talonflame doesn't want to lose its boots, Salazzle doesn't want to get slept. Those are like a lot of those things. Yeah, I mean, over allowance on knock and Sleep Powder to stop being passive, I don't really I don't think that's really a counterpoint, personally, because, you know, knockoff's kind of just a good move. And being able to take a Pokemon, either being able to severely cripple a certain Pokemon, because a lot of the mons that would switch into knock truly don't want to take one. He talked about Escavalier not really hating it. Yes and no, because Wish support's super easy to pair with it, but you're still being forced to try to pass Wishes more frequently. And since a lot of Escavalier sets do base themselves around Protect, you're losing a lot of your efficacy there. And of course, Sleep Powder being able to just take something like Salazzle out, that's huge. And then, he talks about this is like your check to these things. I mean, yeah, that's huge. And he says, like, flavor of the month meme. I just feel like that's needlessly, you know, passive-aggressive. Let's look at what Tangela checks. He mentions like 4 Pokemon, so Tangela can check a few more than that. You deal with those Diamond Storm Body Press Diancies really consistently. You do check Escavalier just by knocking it as it switches in. Same thing with Dragalge, Talonflame. CB Guzzlord you don't really want to deal with ever because of knockoff, so we won't talk about him. But you knock Raja, you can even kind of pivot around Raja. Heavy Slam does, I think, 44 at max to full Fizz of Tangela, but you can still at least try to position better by throwing Tangela in there versus it and then pivoting on something different. Or even just, I mean, if you don't care about its health necessarily too much in a game, you can at least knock the Raja. And getting rid of its AV may be big for a teammate. You beat up on Golurk really well, you beat up on Silvally-Ground really well. We did talk earlier about how you don't want to deal with the constant Sword Stance followed by U-turn, but Regenerator does help keep that from being as big of a deal as maybe it otherwise could be. You check Tauros, you check Vaporeon even, for what that's worth, you check Decidueye. I'm gonna say you check Tyrantrum, which you do, but Head Smash does 57 maximum from like CB Adamant. So it is a little scary. But you check Rhydon, you check Serena. Serena's a little weird as well to talk about, because it does run knockoff quite frequently. But I mean, you can kind of check. I guess if it was like... There are some Serena sets that you're not the worst at switching it to. It's a weirder one. Snorlax, though, you kind of check as well. And at this point, we're kind of dealing with Shitmons, so I won't talk too much about them. But I do think that the post just kind of doesn't accurately represent what Tangela can check. And it's not like I want to stand for them on here very hard, because it's a C+ mon. I don't really care if it's ranked or not. The really fringe Pokemon could get unranked or stay ranked. God, this is too many Pokemon C+, though. Please unrank this guy. He's bad. Who else should just get unranked while we're at it? Let's say unranked Ninjask, too. Honestly, somebody's probably just dropped a C, but that's beside the point. I do think Sneasel's... Not Sneasel. Sneasel, though, yes. But I do think Tangela is at least a little bit better than that post lets on. So, anyhow, I hope y'all enjoyed this. I think the VR overall is looking a fair bit cleaner now. We don't have the, like, 3 Pokemon mid-B problem that we were dealing with. So just aesthetically, it's a lot nicer. I just hope we see some of this stuff, like, moved down. Or unranked, because... And maybe even moved up for some of them, but... There's just weird bloat right here. And we're getting to that point where I almost want to say, you know what? What if we just said only 1 C rank? That would just look so much nicer. And yeah, y'all take care. I'll catch you next time. Peace.